Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to do a deep dive into a movie that really shook things up in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Captain America, Civil War. We're going behind the scenes, unpacking the critical reception, and exploring why this film continues to resonate with fans all these years later. To guide us on this deep dive, we've got some great sources lined up. We've got a detailed report on the film itself and some insights from Wikipedia. So buckle up because this is going to be a wild ride. Just to give you a taste what we're dealing with here. Civil War had one of the biggest opening weekends in cinematic history, so clearly it struck a chord with audiences. But what was it about this film that made it such a phenomenon?
Well, I think one of the key things is that Civil War isn't your typical good guys versus bad guys superhero flick. It goes deeper. It explores some really complex themes like individual freedom versus collective security, the nature of power, and the consequences of unchecked authority. And it does all of this while still delivering those epic action sequences and introducing some iconic characters to the MCU, like Black Panther and Spider-Man.
Oh yeah, the introduction of those characters was huge, GE. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's rewind a bit and talk about the premise of the film. It all revolves around something called the Sokovia Accords.
Right, the Sokovia Accords.
Remember all those massive battles in the previous Avengers movies? New York, Washington, D.C., Sokovia. Yeah, well, the world is understandably kind of freaked out by all the collateral damage, the destruction, the loss of life.
It's not surprising, is it?
These superheroes are incredibly powerful, but their actions have consequences. And the Sokovia Accords are basically the UN's attempt to regulate these superheroes, to hold them accountable for their actions.
It's a controversial move, for sure, and it immediately creates a divide among the Avengers.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. You've got Captain America, the symbol of freedom, the guy who always stands up for what's right. He sees these accords as a slippery slope. He's worried that signing them will compromise the Avengers' independence, turn them into tools of the government.
Basically, he doesn't want them to lose their autonomy, their ability to make their own decisions about when and where to intervene.
Exactly. He believes in individual liberty, in the right to fight for what you believe in, even if it means going against the grain. But then, you've got Iron Man on the other side of the debate, and he's haunted by the consequences of their past actions. Ultron, the destruction in Sokovia.
He feels a tremendous amount of guilt and responsibility.
Yeah, and he sees the Accords as a way to atone for those mistakes, as a necessary step to prevent future tragedies, to ensure that the Avengers are held accountable for their actions.
It's not that he wants to be controlled by the government, he just believes that some level of oversight is necessary to prevent things from spiraling out of control again.
So you've got these two iconic heroes, Cap and Iron Man, who are both deeply principled, but they have fundamentally different views on how to move forward. And it's not just them. Other heroes are forced to choose sides. Black Widow and Falcon stand with Cap. War Machine and Black Panther align with Iron Man.
And each character brings their own baggage, their own experiences and beliefs to the table.
It's like this giant moral dilemma playing out on a global scale. And it makes you think, right, if you were in their shoes, where would you stand? Would you prioritize individual freedom or collective security?
It's not an easy question to answer, and the film doesn't shy away from that complexity.
Not at all. And this moral conflict leads to some of the most intense action sequences we've seen in the MCU. I mean, the airport fight scene alone is a visual masterpiece.
Oh yeah, it's like a ballet of superpowers, with all these different heroes using their unique abilities in this incredible choreographed fight.
The Russo brothers, the directors, really pushed the boundaries with that scene.
They used IMAX cameras to capture the scope and energy of the battle, and the visual effects are just mind-blowing.
It's one of those scenes that you just have to see on the big screen to truly appreciate. But Civil War isn't just about big action set pieces. There's real emotional weight to this film.
Absolutely.
I mean, the death of Goliath, that was a gut punch.
It was a turning point in the film, and it really showed that the stakes were incredibly high.
Yeah, this wasn't just a throwaway moment. It had real consequences. And it shattered the Avengers.
The Russo brothers did a brilliant job balancing those epic action sequences with the emotional depth of the story. They wanted the audience to feel the impact of each punch, each loss.
And they succeeded. You really feel the weight of the conflict, both on a global scale and on a personal level. But before we dive into the lasting impact of Civil War, I want to take a peek behind the curtain and talk about what it took to bring this massive film to life. I mean, making a movie like Civil War must have been a logistical nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. A huge ensemble cast, filming locations across the globe, complex visual effects. It's mind-boggling when you think about all the moving parts.
The report we have highlights the meticulous planning that went into coordinating all of these elements. They filmed in Germany, Puerto Rico, Norway, each location adding a unique visual layer to the film.
It's like a global tapestry.
And then there's the casting process. Finding the right Spider-Man was a huge deal for fans. Everyone was waiting to see who would step into those iconic shoes.
Tom Holland's casting was a bit of a last-minute decision, from what I understand.
Really?
Yeah, and I think he was like 19 at the time.
Wow. Can you imagine the pressure, stepping into such a beloved role at such a young age?
It must have been daunting, but he nailed it. He's become synonymous with Spider-Man for a whole new generation of fans.
And speaking of nailing it, the marketing for Civil War was genius.
Oh, yeah.
The trailers broke records for views. And that whole hashtag Team Cap versus hashtag Team Iron Man debate online.
That was a stroke of genius.
It got everyone talking, picking sides, and it really amplified the anticipation for the film.
It wasn't just about hype, though. They also used the movie's platform to address important social issues.
Right, like with the Girls Reforming the Future challenge.
That was a great initiative. It encouraged young women to pursue careers in STEM fields, using the film as a springboard for positive change.
It added another layer of meaning to the whole Civil War phenomenon.
Exactly.
It showed that they were aware of their cultural influence and that they were willing to use it for good.
It wasn't just a blockbuster. It was a cultural event.
Okay, so we've talked about the premise, the characters,
Yeah.
the action, the behind-the-scenes stuff. But now let's get into the critical reception. How did the critics respond to this complex and ambitious film?
Overwhelmingly positive, actually. The reviews praised the character development, the emotional depth, the way the film blended humor with serious themes.
That sounds like they were impressed.
They were. And let's not forget about the box office numbers. It was a massive hit, earning over $1 billion worldwide.
Wow. I guess that answers the question of whether or not it resonated with audiences.
It definitely did.
But before we jump into the film's legacy and its impact on the MCU, I want to take a quick detour and talk about the source material, the Civil War comic book storyline.
Yeah.
How closely did the movie actually follow the comics?
That's where things get interesting. While the film borrows the core concept of superheroes being divided over government control, it takes some liberties in adapting the story.
Oh.
Yeah. For example, the comic book Superhero Registration Act becomes the Sokovia Accords in the film. And the narrative focuses more on the personal conflict between Steve Rogers and Tony Stark.
So it's not a direct adaptation, more like the film took inspiration from the comics and created its own unique interpretation.
Exactly. The comic book delves into a much wider cast of characters and has a more sprawling narrative. The film streamlines the story, focusing primarily on the emotional fallout within the core Avengers team.
It makes sense. They had to make choices, adapt the story to fit the medium of film.
Right.
And I'm curious, how do the endings compare?
Completely different. And the comic book's resolution has far-reaching consequences for the entire Marvel universe, while the film opts for a more personal and somewhat ambiguous ending.
That's fascinating. So even though they share the same core concept, the film and the comic book ultimately tell very different stories.
They do, and I think that's part of what makes the film so compelling. It's not just a rehash of the comics. It's its own unique beast.
Right. It takes those core ideas and explores them in a new and exciting way.
And it does it in a way that resonates with a modern audience.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. But there's still so much more to unpack, like the film's lasting impact on the MCU, and the thought-provoking questions it raises about power, responsibility, and the nature of freedom.
And don't forget about those bonus features. We'll have to talk about the Team Thor mockumentary.
Oh, yeah, that's a must-watch.
Yeah.
So stay tuned, folks, because we're just getting started. Okay, so we left off talking about how Civil War took some liberties in adapting the original comic book storyline.
Right.
But it's clear that the film really resonated with audiences. I mean, it was a critical and commercial success.
It really was.
So what do you think it was about this particular adaptation that made such a profound impact, not just on the MCU, but on the superhero genre as a whole?
Well, I think one of the things that Civil War did so brilliantly was it showed that these superhero films, they could be more than just popcorn entertainment.
Okay, yeah.
They could grapple with real-world issues, challenge our assumptions about heroism,
Yeah.
and leave us with some really thought-provoking questions.
And it did that without sacrificing any of the action
Yeah.
or the spectacle
Yeah.
that we've come to expect from these Marvel movies.
Exactly.
So speaking of thought-provoking questions, this film really doesn't shy away from the consequences of this conflict, right? I mean,
Yeah.
relationships are shattered, trust is broken, and the Avengers are left in pieces by the end. It's a bold move for a superhero franchise, to leave things so messy and unresolved.
Oh, absolutely. But I think that's also what makes it feel real. In the real world, there aren't always easy answers or clear-cut solutions, and Civil War embraces that complexity. It shows us that even superheroes, they have to deal with the fallout of their choices.
Yeah, they can't just punch their way out of every problem.
Exactly.
It's almost like Civil War represents this kind of coming-of-age moment. For the MCU, it acknowledges that these larger-than-life heroes, they operate in a world where actions have consequences.
Right.
They can't always escape the repercussions.
And it cleverly uses this to evolve its characters. Think about Captain America. He's always been the symbol of unwavering righteousness, always standing up for what he believes in.
Right.
But in Civil War, he's forced to confront the limits of blind obedience. He chooses to stand by his friend Bucky, even if it means defying authority.
Yeah.
And that decision fundamentally changes him. It sets him on a more independent path.
And then you have Iron Man, who's typically the more rebellious one, right?
Right,
But
yeah.
in Civil War, he's advocating for control and accountability.
It's an interesting role reversal.
It really is. And it speaks volumes about the depth of Tony Stark's character arc. He's carrying the weight of past mistakes, and he's desperately trying to prevent future disasters. His support for the Accords, while maybe flawed, comes from a place of genuine concern.
And of course, the conflict with Cap. Seeing his friend potentially manipulated by Zemo, it leaves him deeply scarred.
It's heartbreaking. And it's one of the things that makes Civil War so compelling. There's no clear-cut good versus evil.
Yep.
Both Cap and Iron Man have valid points, which makes their conflict all the more tragic.
Yeah, it's a clash of ideals. Loyalty versus responsibility. And the film doesn't shy away from exploring those gray areas.
It really doesn't. And amidst all this moral complexity and character development, Civil War also manages to introduce two iconic characters to the MCU, Black Panther and Spider-Man.
Talk about a grand entrance.
I know, right?
Black Panther instantly captivated audiences with his unique motivations and his regal presence, his story arc, driven by vengeance, but ultimately evolving toward a more nuanced understanding of justice. It just added another layer of depth to the film.
Yeah, he's such a complex character. And then there's Spider-Man, a fan favorite, who finally makes his way into the MCU. Tom Holland's youthful energy and his quippy portrayal of Peter Parker, it instantly resonated with audiences.
Oh, yeah.
That moment in the airport battle, where he swings through the chaos and steals Captain America's shield.
Yeah.
Pure cinematic magic.
Pure magic.
It's amazing how seamlessly these new characters were integrated into the already crowded narrative of Civil War. It's a testament to the filmmaker's skill in balancing a large ensemble cast while still giving each character their due.
Absolutely. They didn't just shoehorn them in. For fan service, Black Panther and Spider-Man, they have meaningful roles that serve both the immediate story and the larger MCU tapestry.
Right.
Their introduction in Civil War had a ripple effect. It paved the way for their own standalone films and further adventures within the franchise.
And speaking of ripple effects, the events of Civil War cast a long shadow over the MCU,
Oh, for sure.
influencing storylines and character arcs in subsequent films.
Absolutely. The ramifications of the Sokovia Accords, the fractured relationships between the Avengers, the introduction of Black Panther and Spider-Man, all of these elements had a significant impact on films like Black Panther, Spider-Man, Homecoming, and of course the Infinity War saga.
Right. Civil War wasn't just a standalone story. It was a turning point for the MCU, a catalyst for events that would unfold in future phases of the franchise. And we can't forget about the home media release, which included some amazing bonus features.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
A Team Thor mockumentary, directed by Taika Waititi. It's a gem.
It is a gem.
You know, Thor wasn't actually involved in the events of Civil War.
Right.
So Waititi basically imagined Thor living his best life in Australia, completely oblivious to all the drama unfolding with the other Avengers.
It's hilarious.
It's so funny. So even the bonus features for Civil War are pushing creative boundaries. It just shows.
Yeah.
The Marvel Studios, even with their massive blockbuster releases, they still encourage experimentation.
And humor. Absolutely. It adds another layer of enjoyment to the whole Civil War experience.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here. The intricate plot points, the complex themes, the behind-the-scenes details, the lasting impact on the MCU.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what do you really want our listeners to take away from Captain America, Civil War?
That's a good question. It's easy to get caught up in the action, the special effects, the introduction of new characters.
Right.
But for me, I think what sets Civil War apart, what makes it truly special, is its exploration of moral complexity. It doesn't offer any easy answers. It challenges us to really think about the nuances of freedom, security, and what it means to be responsible when you have extraordinary power. These are questions that I think are perhaps even more relevant in our world today than they were back in 2016 when the film was released.
Yeah, I agree. It's not just about superheroes fighting each other. It's reflection of our own struggles with authority, loyalty, and trying to do the right thing, even when it's incredibly difficult. Civil War really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And I think that's a hallmark of great storytelling. It entertains, it excites, but it also stays with you long after the credits have rolled. It prompts you to consider these complex issues and how they might relate to your own life and to the world around you.
Absolutely. And if you haven't seen Captain America Civil War in a while, or maybe even if you're a first-time viewer, I highly recommend giving it a watch or a rewatch with fresh eyes. Pay attention to the character dynamics, those tough, ethical choices, and how the film reflects those very real anxieties that we all have about power and responsibility. I think you'll find something new to appreciate, something that resonates deeply with the times we're living in.
And if this deep dive has piqued your interest, I'd also encourage you to check out the original Civil War comic book storyline. It offers a slightly different perspective on the conflict, with a wider cast of characters and more expansive narrative.
Oh, that's a great point. Seeing how different mediums tackle similar themes and ideas can be really illuminating. Who knows? It might even inspire you to dive deeper into the world of comics.
Exactly. There's always more to discover, more connections to make. That's the beauty of storytelling, right? It sparks curiosity and invites us on a journey of exploration.
Well said. Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder. What would you do if you were faced with the Sokovia Accords? Would you side with Captain America's unwavering belief in individual freedom? Or would you agree with Iron Man's stance on the necessity of government oversight? There's no right or wrong answer, but it's a question worth considering, especially as we navigate an increasingly complex world where the lines between freedom and security are constantly being redrawn. So, until next time, keep diving deep. And remember, there are countless fascinating stories out there just waiting to be uncovered at